Red lights flashed, reflecting off the glass walls. A scientist's hand hovered over the console, fingers trembling. Then, he slammed the emergency shutdown button. But it was too late. The virus was already airborne, tearing through the facility faster than any containment measure could stop. And it was contagious. Deadly contagious.
"It's gonna spread like wildfire,"
someone muttered, voice ragged.
"Alert the WHO, now!"
A call went out. The World Health Organization was the only hope, the only chance to stop a global catastrophe from unfolding. Hours later, the world was in total chaos. Lockdowns, quarantine zones, air traffic halted, borders sealed shut. The entire world came to a screeching halt in a matter of days. Back in the laboratory, a group of rogue scientists stood in the shadows. Their eyes were glued to their screens. Data flashed too quickly for any of them to process anything. But they weren't watching the virus. They'd stopped caring about containment. It was too late for that. Their eyes were on the next step. One scientist pushed back from the table, hands shaking, his breath coming quick.
"We need to stop it. Stop it before it even starts."
His voice was hoarse with fear.
"The Foundation's methods aren't working. If we don't act now, we lose everything."
He turned to face the others, voice low but unwavering.
"We need to rewrite history."
The others exchanged looks of worry and then confusion. But slowly, excitement creeped over their faces as he laid out a plan. They would need to build a time-traveling vessel, a ship capable of going back to the origin of the virus. Then, they could erase its birth from history.
"But we need the power to manipulate time,"
one of them said with a horrified glare.
"Only the 5 elements have that knowledge. They're the only ones that specialize in time manipulation."
The room went still. The 5 elements were a secretive, dangerous cult that hoarded ancient occult knowledge with a fervor. Nervous glances were exchanged. Then, one scientist said what everyone was thinking.
"They'll destroy anyone they don't trust. They might destroy the world if it looked at them wrong," he muttered.
Another scientist shot him a look.
"We need them, whether we like it or not."
Another uneasy silence fell.
"The problem," one of them said with a sigh, "is that they'll never willingly help us."
Everyone nodded in agreement. It was common knowledge that the 5 elements hated the Foundation with a passion. The two groups were sworn enemies. The Foundation's experiments with the paranormal and its expansionist agenda were anathema to everything the 5 elements stood for.
"We'll need someone on the inside,"
one of the scientists muttered, his voice darkening.
"A spy. You know the system. You know how to disappear,"
the older one said, his eyes locked onto the man who hadn't spoken yet. The man didn't flinch. His gaze stayed fixed on the table. He wasn't just a scientist. He'd once been a covert ops field agent for the Foundation. He had the skills, the clandestine experience.
"I'll pose as a janitor," he said finally, his voice low. "A ghost. Nobody. I'll gather their knowledge. We can't afford to fail."
The others nodded in unison.
"Do it."
Later that same night, the spy began his preparations. He watched the janitors at the 5 Elements compound for several days, dusting off his old clandestine skills he thought he had buried long ago. He studied their routines, clocking the exact times they entered and exited the building. He watched their movements, their clothes, their mannerisms. He learned how they moved, how they talked, how they slipped in and out unnoticed. One evening, after observing for long enough, he saw his chance. He timed it perfectly, an accidental run-in with one of the janitors as he got off the bus. The janitor barely registered the nudge before the spy took what he needed. A quick swipe of the man's badge. The plan was falling into place. That night, standing in front of the mirror, the spy adjusted his uniform. His hands were steady, no tremor, no nerves. The reflection staring back was almost unrecognizable. The man he had once been was gone. He was just a janitor now. He took a deep breath.
"Infiltrate, steal, deliver,"
he said to himself. The lowly janitor's uniform felt tight around his chest as he grabbed the mop. He adjusted it one last time, glancing at his reflection. He didn't like what he saw, but he didn't have time to care. He slipped into the night to start his first shift. The spy slipped into the 5 Elements compound like a shadow. The hallways were cold, and the dim lighting gave everything a sickly glow. His feet barely made a sound as they glided over the tiled floor. He was in. But he had to be careful. The 5 Elements were paranoid. They didn't just guard their secrets, they coddled them. One mistake, and he was gone. He glanced around the hallway. Nothing. Empty rooms, too many bookshelves, and strange, arcane symbols that didn't belong in this reality. But he couldn't let himself get distracted. Focus. He moved toward the first corridor, where the janitors usually came through to clean. As he pushed open the door to the back hall, he almost walked straight into another janitor, one of the regulars. The guy squinted at him.
Who are you?
The janitor asked, voice gruff. The spy forced himself to smile, though it felt like his face was made of stone.
First day. I'm new.
The voice didn't shake, but it felt like it did. The man looked at him for a beat, his expression still uncertain. But then the guy nodded, still skeptical.
All right, well, don't screw up the schedule. We don't do slackers here.
He waved and trudged off, leaving the spy with his heart hammering in his chest. The spy's eyes flicked back down the hallway. He had no time for this. He kept moving. As he passed through the hall, something caught his eye. A small, empty room, half open with a faint flicker of light spilling through. He crept in, peeking through the crack in the door. What he saw almost made him freeze. Inside, 5 Elements practitioners were standing in a circle, hands raised toward the ceiling. The air shimmered with tension. There was a low hum, barely audible, but it thrummed in his chest, vibrating like it was coming from the core of the earth itself. They were in the middle of a ritual, and from the look of things, it wasn't a simple one. A circle of fire danced in front of the first practitioner. His fingers twitched, and the fire morphed, shrinking and expanding like a heartbeat. Beside him, another was manipulating water, swirling it in the air with his hands as if pulling it from the very air around him. A third practitioner had earth in his grasp, stones floating around him like a storm. The final one, a woman, seemed to be playing with wind, her fingers slicing through the air and bending it to her will. And in the center, time. The air distorted around them, vibrating like a stretched rubber band. Seconds seemed to stretch, then snap back, moments running into each other in impossible loops. It was time manipulation in its rawest form. This was it. This was exactly what the rogue scientists needed. The spy quickly fumbled inside his uniform, pulling out a small camera hidden in the button. He started recording as the practitioners continued their ritual, completely unaware of his presence. This was precious. The footage could change everything. With the information he needed in tote, he turned off his camera and began to back away from the room when the worst possible thing happened. A man, a 5 Elements agent, appeared behind him, seemingly out of thin air.
What are you doing?
The agent's voice was low, suspicious. He was too close. The spy cursed under his breath. No way out. He turned, keeping his movements slow, his face casually confused.
Just checking the room, cleaning up after the ritual.
His voice sounded unnaturally smooth, but his gut was churning. The agent raised an eyebrow.
Funny, I don't remember seeing you before. You're not on my list.
He stepped closer, eyes narrowing.
What are you really doing here?
The agent's suspicion was rising fast. If he didn't buy his story, he was done. The spy's mind raced. He could feel the pressure mounting. This was it. The end. Unless... In a split second, he reached into his pocket and tore open a small packet. The smell hit before he even had time to brace himself. It was terrible, like rotten food and old socks. Worse than that, like death itself had taken a bath in vinegar. The agent scrunched up his face, stepping back, hands covering his nose.
I have stomach issues. Sorry,
the spy said, stepping away casually, like the smell was no big deal. The 5 Elements agent waved a hand in the air, grimacing.
That's disgusting.
He took one last look at the spy, still skeptical, before walking away. The spy didn't wait for him to disappear into the hallway. He darted out of the compound, his legs moving faster than his heart. He wove through the darkened streets, but his steps weren't nearly as fast as the hammering of his heart. He had to get back to the laboratory, but not yet, not until he was sure he wasn't being followed. So he took the long way. He didn't need to go through the rundown part of the city, didn't need to grab anything from the corner store, but he did it anyway. Buying food he didn't need, picking up a coffee he wasn't thirsty for. The first stop was a quick pit stop to throw off any potential tail. The second, a well-timed delay, just in case. He wandered through random streets, checked over his shoulder, and waited, pretending to sip at the coffee like it wasn't already lukewarm and useless. The whole time, his eyes flicked over his shoulder, checking the shadows. Anyone following him from the first stop? Didn't look like it. Best to be sure, though. At the third place, a bodega 10 blocks from the coffee shop, he finally let himself relax a little. No tales. He could go back to the lab, continue his mission, but every time he thought about that last run-in with the 5 Elements agent, a chill ran down his spine. So he decided to do a few more stops before returning to his colleagues. Back in the laboratory, the rogue scientists were preparing for the next phase of the mission, but unbeknownst to them, there was a rat in their midst. One of the scientists, a man who had always been a little too anxious, had gotten scared. Too scared. The Foundation's eyes were everywhere, and the thought of them catching wind of the rogue project and shutting it down was enough to make him a snitch. He walked briskly down the hallway, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. The O5 council member's office was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single desk lamp. The mole scientist entered, his heart pounding. The O5 council member barely looked up from the paperwork.
"You're here. Talk."
The mole scientist hesitated, but the council member's command left no room for argument. He relayed everything: the rogue scientists, the time travel project, the spaceship, and the plague they were trying to stop. The council member raised an eyebrow. He mused.
"I like that. But we're going to change more than just the plague. I have a more personal agenda."
The mole scientist blinked, his throat tightening. He didn't understand. The council member continued, voice low, almost too calm.
"We need to change more than just that. I have a different point in time I want to adjust."
The scientist's stomach turned.
"But the ship has to go back to stop the plague, or millions of people will die worldwide,"
the scientist timidly reminded him. The council member leaned forward with a menacing glare.
"I need there to be embryos aboard that ship. Embryos with the DNA of certain O5 council members."
The mole scientist's heart skipped a beat. He tried his best to protest the idea, tried to protect humanity, but the council member's eyes narrowed, silencing him.
"Get both men and women on that ship, inject the embryos, and don't say a word. If you mess this up," he added, the threat sharp, "your family, your life, gone."
The mole scientist's face went pale. His hands trembled as he nodded reluctantly. Later that night, as the rogue scientists discussed their next steps, the mole scientist returned to the lab. His mind was reeling, but he had a job to do now. He didn't waste any time. With the janitor spy still absent, he presented his idea to the group.
"What if we take a few of us aboard the ship?"
he suggested casually, trying to sound convincing.
"We could monitor the mission, make sure the ship's trajectory is perfect."
He kept his voice level, not betraying the weight of what was really happening.
"And maybe we put some embryos aboard the ship, to ensure even if something goes wrong, humanity will continue to exist throughout time."
The rogue scientists looked at each other. There were murmurs, but they all agreed. It made sense. And with the janitor spy's return, everything began falling into place. The ship would be built, infused with the ritual power they had stolen from the 5 Elements. The mole scientist didn't wait for anyone to question it. He got to work, injecting O5 Council DNA into the embryos. The night before the launch, the laboratory hummed with activity. Everyone was double-checking their work, making sure the ship was ready. The rogue scientists moved quickly, putting final touches on their time-bending technology. No one suspected a thing. Hours later, after the rogue scientists had left, the mole returned to the launch site, convinced that he was alone. He tiptoed into the darkened room, making final adjustments to the ship's time destination trajectory. But just as his finger hovered over the enter key, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps behind him. He turned. The spy, the man who had posed as a janitor, was there, standing in the shadows, his eyes locked onto the computer screen.
"What do you think you're doing?"
The spy's voice was low, sharp. The mole scientist froze, his breath caught. How much had he seen? He knew there was no way out now. With a shaky breath, he stepped forward, hands held up in surrender.
I had to do it. I had no choice. The O5 Council, they..."
His voice quivered, and tears began to stream down his cheeks as he spilled the beans to his clandestine colleague that the ship wasn't going back to stop the plague. The spy's eyes narrowed.
"What else? What's really going on?"
The mole scientist swallowed hard.
I injected O5 DNA into the embryos, but that's not all. The council member wants control over reality itself. He's recalibrating it, rewriting it the way he wants."
The spy's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, seething with anger.
You're not getting away with this,
the spy said, but before he could pull the mole away from the computer, the traitor pressed the enter key. In the blink of an eye, the spy's fist connected with the mole's face with a sickening crack. The traitor's body crumpled to the floor like a sack of potatoes, eyes rolling into the back of his head. He was unconscious before his body even hit the ground. Did he need to do that? No. Was it satisfying? Absolutely. He stared down at the now unconscious scientist for a moment. He should feel something. Regret, maybe? But there was no time. The mission was falling apart, and his only option was to fix it. He turned back to the computer, fists still clenched. He had to return the ship's trajectory to the correct time, the one that would stop the plague before it even happened, the one that could save the world. But the computer was locked. He tried everything, fiddling with the keyboard like a rookie. No dice. This wasn't some minor glitch. Whatever the mole did had permanently sealed the deal. The mission was over. Or was it? Whatever the O5 Council member had planned, it was worse than the plague. It had to be. The spy knew it. He could feel it in his gut. The ship couldn't reach its intended destination, not with that trajectory. No way. He turned and stormed out of the lab. He had one last card to play. The clock was ticking. He stormed into his office and grabbed his janitorial uniform from the nearby chair. He couldn't believe he was doing this again. The same disguise, the same routine, but there was no choice. The mission was ruined, and something worse was unfolding right under his nose. He slipped the uniform on, adjusting the cheap mop head and scrubbing gloves, and marched out the door. The 5 elements were his only hope now. This time, he wasn't sneaking in to steal their secrets. He was going to share one of his own. The compound was eerily quiet when he entered. Too quiet, like something was wrong. He moved quickly down the hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He checked the rooms one by one. Nothing. No one. The place was practically abandoned. Where was everyone? His gut told him this wasn't just some regular empty shift. Something was off. He backed out of a room, careful not to make a sound. Then, as if the universe had a sense of irony, he bumped into someone. The 5 Elements agent, the same one he'd smelly bombed not too long ago. And of course, he had seemingly materialized out of thin air. Again. The agent stood there like he'd been waiting for him all along. The spy didn't move. He just stared at the agent, who was staring back at him. The air between them crackled with something dangerous.
You again.
The agent's voice was low, flat. He didn't look surprised, just interested. The spy's mind raced. He cursed himself quietly. The agent's eyes narrowed.
This place is shut down. Safety breach. The whole compound's been moved.
The spy raised his eyebrows, feigning confusion. Where? Why? The agent didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained locked on the spy.
You're not supposed to be here.
He took a step closer, eyes sharp as knives.
So, tell me, what exactly are you doing?
The spy's pulse quickened. The agent was way too close to finding out the truth. He had 2 choices now. Lie, say something about routine cleaning, play it off, but that'd only buy him a few seconds. Or tell the truth. Tell him about the mission, the ship, the O5 Council's dirty little secret. Time was running out. The spaceship launch was too close. He needed someone who could help him, and the agent seemed to be his only shot. The spy took a deep breath and then blurted it all out. The agent stared at him, barely blinking. His expression was unreadable.
I don't know how to make you believe me,
the spy cried, frustration creeping into his voice.
But I'm telling you the truth. If we don't stop that ship, whatever destination the O5 Council member has in mind, it's going to ruin everything. You need to trust me.
The agent cocked his head, weighing the spy's words. There was hesitation in his eyes now. Doubt. This anomalous object, which was later designated as SCP-2002, first came to our attention when it was heading straight for Earth. Our deep space assets detected it, and at first, it seemed like just another piece of space debris. But it quickly became clear this was intentional. There was nothing random about it. So the Global Occult Coalition, the GOC, decided to jump in and take matters into their own hands. They fired on the ship with a high-powered carbon dioxide laser, thinking they could neutralize the threat. They managed to break the main hull and scatter some of the smaller spheres across space. Not exactly the neat, effective solution they'd hoped for. But here's the problem. Some of those smaller spheres survived the attack. And they didn't just disappear into space. Some of them made their way to Earth, which only complicated things for us. When we finally got our hands on the wreckage, it was clear that this wasn't just a random piece of junk. It was part of a bigger, more complex anomaly. And we began to realize we weren't just dealing with a broken-down spaceship. SCP-2002 was a temporal continuity anomaly, meaning it came from a different timeline or reality, one that didn't quite fit with ours. But before we could piece everything together, something even stranger happened. Bodies. When we combed through the wreckage, we found human remains. Some of them were badly damaged, but others were surprisingly intact. 5 adult males, 21 adult females, 142 newborn infant males, and 377 newborn infant females, all found among the wreckage. And to make things even more bizarre, DNA testing showed that some of these bodies matched partial DNA samples of current Foundation personnel. That includes several members of the O5 Council. You can imagine how jarring that was. A lot of questions popped up. Why were these bodies here? What was going on with this ship? Was this thing really a time traveler? And why were some of the bodies linked to us? None of that was supposed to be possible. And then, to make matters even more complicated, there were the messages from SCP-2002 itself. When we had tried to communicate with it, the ship had responded. We sent signals through our SETI systems, but the responses came on a frequency reserved for Foundation traffic. The ship seemed to already know that we were trying to make contact. It didn't just send a random response, it came straight to us. The message suggested that SCP-2002 was self-sufficient enough to make a return trip to Earth on its own, no help needed, which naturally raised even more questions. If the ship had systems that could guide it back to Earth, what was its real purpose? What did it want? So we classified it as Keter because of the potential for catastrophic consequences. Its landing, if uncontrolled, could have triggered a K-class scenario. We had no idea what kind of impact it could have, but the implications of losing control of it were dire. Now here's where it gets even more strange. SCP-2002 was detected at a distance of 15.8 AU from Earth, which was much later than we expected. According to our initial models, we should have discovered it years earlier, but instead it appeared later than expected, suggesting that time itself had been distorted in some way. We were now dealing with an anomaly that didn't just travel through space, it seemed to also be bending time. Something that could exist in a reality we didn't fully understand. Of course, this wasn't enough for the GOC. They decided to destroy it anyway, thinking that was their only option. A few days after the laser attack, their satellite, which had been involved in the destruction, was sabotaged and crashed into the Brazilian rainforest. We recovered the wreckage, which led to more questions about the GOC's involvement. It wasn't just that they didn't know what they were dealing with. They actively tried to eliminate any evidence of SCP-2002's existence. But that's the thing about the Foundation. We don't let things go. We kept the wreckage, and when we examined it further, we realized that SCP-2002 had a purpose. It had been designed to alter something far beyond the physical world. And one last thing. The wreckage wasn't just full of strange technology, it was full of secrets. Our investigations turned up more internal memos, emails, encrypted messages, and even detailed reports from the GOC, something they tried to keep quiet. In the end, the GOC had known about SCP-2002 for a while, but their intelligence was incomplete. Their botched attack on the ship was a direct result of their lack of understanding of what they were up against. SCP-2002's wreckage is safely contained at Site-102, and we're still trying to make sense of everything. And as for the O5 Council, their involvement in all this is still unclear, but rest assured, we're digging into that.